His birth name was Gaius Octavius. Through his mother's side, he was the grandnephew of Julius Caesar. But when Caesar was assassinated in 44 BCE, he held no real power or authority of his own. Even though Caesar had named him as his heir and adopted son in his will, that alone didn't guarantee that young Octavius would gain an important position in Rome. After Caesar's death, dozens of ambitious figures rushed to fill the sudden power vacuum in the capital. No one believed that a 19-year-old boy could possibly take Caesar's place. But Octavius was not the type to abandon what he believed was rightfully his. One by one, he would overcome every obstacle in his path, rise to become the sole ruler of the Roman Republic, and ultimately transform that republic into an empire. And in the end, he would wield even greater power than Caesar himself. So how did Octavius accomplish all of this? To understand that, we need to go back to 63 BCE, to the very heart of the Republic, the city of Rome. Octavius was born in 63 BCE near Rome. His father gave him his own name, Gaius Octavius. His mother, Atia, was the daughter of Julia, Julius Caesar's sister. The very year Octavius was born, Caesar was elected Pontifex Maximus, the highest priestly office in the Roman state religion. From that moment on, Caesar climbed the turbulent ladder of Roman politics step by step, and by 44 BCE, he had been declared dictator for life by the Senate. No one in Rome's history had ever reached the level of authority and power that Caesar now possessed. But some of his actions deeply disturbed members of the Senate, including his own adopted son, Marcus Junius Brutus. This growing resentment towards Caesar's rise ultimately led to his assassination in March of 44 BCE. The senators who carried out the assassination believed that, after Caesar's death, the Roman Republic would return to its old order. They expected to be praised for freeing the Republic from a dictator. But the people of Rome, and many Roman statesmen, did not share their view. Caesar was a highly popular and well-loved figure in Rome. He had won the affection of the public by spending much of his wealth on festivals and spectacles in the capital. And on top of that, the lands he had conquered made him a hero in the eyes of the Roman people. Marcus Antonius, one of Caesar's generals and his close friend, fueled the public's anger against the assassins with the speech he delivered at the funeral. After that speech, most of Caesar's killers could no longer remain safely in Rome. They were forced to flee the city. In his will, Caesar declared that since he had no legitimate children, he was adopting his nephew Octavius as his son and heir. However, Antonius used the power he had gained through his close relationship with Caesar to direct this wealth toward his own interests. Octavius, named as the heir, was only 19 at the time. He was in Illyria, receiving military training alongside the legions Caesar had chosen for the Parthian campaign he had been planning. Before long, he learned of Caesar's death and of the will. Now he had to decide what to do. He could take command of the troops in Illyria and try to avenge Caesar, but that would be a risky move. Instead, he could travel to Rome and attempt to claim the inheritance Caesar had left for him, or he could simply refuse the inheritance and continue living his ordinary life. Octavius didn't want to act prematurely. He thought it best to go to Rome first and see the situation with his own eyes. When he crossed the Adriatic Sea and arrived in Italy, he was welcomed with great enthusiasm by the public and by many soldiers who supported Caesar. This convinced him to accept Caesar's inheritance, and he changed his name to Gaius Julius Caesar. That decision led many soldiers and Caesar loyalists to rally behind him. With the support he had gathered, Octavius finally set his plans in motion and made his way to Rome. There, he demanded from Antonius the inheritance Caesar had left specifically for him. Even though Octavius had gained the backing of a portion of Caesar's supporters, he was still, in reality, an ordinary citizen with no official authority in Rome. Antonius, on the other hand, had no intention of handing over Caesar's wealth to a 19-year-old boy who held no power whatsoever. So he rejected Octavius's request, offering various excuses in return. 1 month after Caesar's death in April, two of his assassins, Marcus Junius Brutus and Cassius, realized they could no longer remain in Italy. Unable to find safety or support, they fled to Greece. Antonius knew that every day he failed to avenge Caesar's death, his reputation was slipping further. In this situation, he believed having political immunity would benefit him. But to obtain that immunity, he needed to be appointed as the governor of a province. He petitioned the Senate to be assigned as the governor of Cisalpine Gaul. He chose this province because it was close to Rome, allowing him to stay nearby and maintain the pressure he had been exerting on the Senate. However, Cisalpine Gaul was currently under the command of Decimus Brutus, and Decimus had no intention of surrendering the province to Antonius. Antonius marched with the troops under his command and besieged Decimus in the city of Mutina. Even though the Senate demanded that the siege be lifted, Antonius refused to comply. As a result, the Senate appointed Octavius as a senator and granted him military command. The young senator was expected to stop Antonius's campaign. Octavius set out with the troops under his command and reached Mutina. In the battle fought in April of 43 BCE, both sides suffered heavy losses, and Antonius was ultimately forced to lift the siege. But the fate of Antonius and Octavius was not limited to being enemies. Just 5 months after the Battle of Mutina, in October, Antonius, Octavius, and Marcus Lepidus formed an alliance known as the Second Triumvirate, creating a new 3-man office with absolute authority. Their aim in establishing this agreement was to end the rivalry among Caesar's supporters. This way, they could finally focus on their true objective: avenging Caesar's killers. During this period, Sextus Pompeius, who was in Sicily, had launched a rebellion. Sextus was the son of Pompeius Magnus, Caesar's former rival. Pompeius Magnus had been defeated by Caesar at the Battle of Pharsalus and fled to Egypt, where he was killed by agents of the pharaoh. Sextus's brother, Gnaeus Pompeius, had been defeated by Caesar in the Battle of Munda in Spain, and afterward was convicted of treason by the Roman Senate and executed. Sextus had managed to escape after that battle and fled to Sicily. Now he was openly in revolt against Rome. The rebellion in Sicily needed to be suppressed, but the primary targets of Caesar's supporters were still Cassius and Brutus. Their priority was to march against them. This gave Sextus the opportunity to expand his forces and build a powerful navy by using the shores of Sicily. In October of 42 BC, the Battle of Philippi was fought between Caesar's supporters and his assassins, and the victory went to Caesar's supporters. Brutus and Cassius, unable to bear their defeat, took their own lives. After this victory, the Roman Republic was divided into 3 administrative regions. Octavius would govern the land from Illyria to Spain, Antonius would control the territory from Macedonia to Palestine, and Marcus Lepidus would rule Africa. Italy, meanwhile, was declared an independent region, but because of its proximity, it was effectively under Octavius's control. Peace seemed to have returned to Rome, at least on the surface, but Sicily was still in the hands of Sextus. During the Civil War, the rebel leader had built a massive fleet, and that made him more dangerous than ever. Once his preparations were complete, Sextus made his move in 40 BC. With the naval power he had gathered, he seized the islands of Sardinia and Corsica. Losing these islands around Italy created a serious security weakness for Rome. Octavius knew he had to put an end to this situation, but his army had just come out of a war, and the soldiers were reluctant to fight again. On top of that, he didn't have a fleet large enough to confront Sextus. Antonius, preparing for his Parthian campaign, had no intention of dealing with Sextus in Sicily. Because of all these factors, Octavius decided to make peace with Sextus. Under the agreement, Sextus's control over Sardinia and Corsica was officially recognized. In addition, the Peloponnese Peninsula was handed over to him as well. While all of this was happening in the west, Antonius in the east was searching for allies for his upcoming campaign against the Parthians. For this purpose, he invited Cleopatra, Julius Caesar's former lover, to Tarsus. What began as negotiations for military support soon shifted into something entirely different. By the end of their talks, Antonius had fallen in love with Cleopatra. Later that same year, Cleopatra invited Antonius to Alexandria. There, the two lovers spent much more time together, and the following year they had twins, a boy and a girl. During this relationship, Antonius was actually married, but while he was with Cleopatra, his wife Fulvia died. After Fulvia's death, Antonius planned to marry Cleopatra. However, a move from Octavius would completely disrupt those plans. After Fulvia's passing, Octavius proposed that Antonius marry his sister, Octavia. Even though Antonius intended to marry Cleopatra, he had no choice but to accept the offer. Rejecting it could have caused the newly formed alliance to collapse. During these years, Sextus once again went on the offensive, launching raids against Italy. Not only that, thanks to the naval dominance he established, he began blocking merchant ships headed for Rome. This led to a food crisis in the capital. To put an end to this, Octavius attempted to seize Sicily in 37 BCE, but the campaign ended in failure. His fleet was defeated in the Battle of Messina and forced to retreat. Sextus's navy was superior to Octavius's, and for Octavius to land forces on Sicily, he first had to destroy Sextus's fleet. But doing that with his current strength was nearly impossible. For this reason, he decided to seek help from Antonius, the man he had married to his sister, Octavia. Through Octavia's mediation, negotiations were held, and Antonius agreed to send Octavius ships and soldiers. With the reinforcements he received, Octavius launched a new offensive against Sextus in 36 BCE. Under the command of his trusted general Marcus Agrippa, Octavius's fleet defeated Sextus's navy at the Battle of Naulochus. Following this victory, Marcus Lepidus, governor of the African provinces, landed in Sicily and seized many important settlements. Lepidus wanted to take control of the territories once held by Sextus. However, his soldiers had no desire to fight Agrippa's troops, and a large portion of them defected to Agrippa's army. After this incident, all of Lepidus's powers were stripped away, and the territories he controlled in Africa passed into the hands of Octavius. Rome was no longer ruled by a triumvirate, but by two men who now held all authority. Inevitably, this would intensify the rivalry between them and lay the groundwork for a new struggle for power. By the late summer of 34 BCE, Marcus Antonius finally launched the Parthian campaign he had been preparing for so long. But the campaign ended in failure, and Antonius was forced to return to Egypt empty-handed. This failed military venture severely damaged his reputation in Rome. Just a year later, Octavius embarked on a campaign in Illyria, and by winning a decisive victory, he greatly increased his popularity in the capital. At the same time, Octavius did not hesitate to conduct propaganda aimed at undermining Antonius's prestige. In particular, he repeatedly brought up Antonius's relationship with Cleopatra, a foreign woman, while Antony already had a noble Roman wife. Octavius emphasized this issue frequently in the Senate, gaining more influence and public support with each passing day. To recover his declining prestige, Antonius launched yet another Parthian campaign. But this expedition also ended in failure. Even so, he made sure to return to Egypt in a triumphal procession. After the celebrations, he bestowed lands upon Cleopatra and their children in an event known as the Donations of Alexandria. According to this declaration, Eastern Libya, Phoenicia, Syria, Cilicia, and Armenia were granted to Cleopatra and her children. Antony's actions provided Octavius with the perfect justification for war, a justification he had been waiting for, as he already sought to take control of the territories under Antony's rule. Octavius used this situation to secure the support of the Roman Senate. He read aloud in the Senate the donations Antony had granted to Cleopatra and her children, declaring that Antony intended to abandon Rome and establish a new kingdom. The idea that Rome's territories were being handed over to an Egyptian woman and her children was something the senators could never accept. And that is exactly what happened. The Senate officially revoked Antony's consular powers and declared war on Cleopatra. In the spring of 32 BCE, Antony set up camp with his army at Cape Actium and anchored his fleet in the Gulf of Ambracia. In September of 31 BCE, Octavius won the Battle of Actium. After this defeat, Cleopatra and Antony were forced to flee to Egypt with the ships carrying their treasures. Octavius pursued them, besieged Alexandria, and after several months of resistance, succeeded in capturing the city. In August, following the fall of Alexandria, Cleopatra and Antony took their own lives to avoid falling into Octavius's hands. After Antony's death, Octavius became the sole ruler of Rome. In 27 BCE, the Senate granted him the title Augustus. This new authority effectively made him the first emperor of Rome. On the journey, he began simply to claim the inheritance Caesar had left him. Octavius ultimately rose to a level of power that perhaps no one had ever expected, a power even Caesar himself had never achieved. And unlike Caesar, he managed to maintain that power for nearly 40 years. When he died in 14 CE, the throne passed to his adopted son and heir, Tiberius. With this, Rome fully transformed into an empire ruled by a monarchy.